At my son's engagement party, my phone vibrated beneath the table. An unknown number sent one line, "Don't react, you are in danger." I kept smiling, slowly lifted my glass, and took a sip of water before looking around the room. Everything seemed perfect: the glittering chandeliers, the warm laughter, the expensive wine. But something felt wrong. My son's fiancée kept watching me. Every few minutes her eyes found mine, not with warmth, but with the cold measuring gaze of someone checking the status of a transaction. Then my phone buzzed again. The next message made my face go pale. Before we go further, I want you to know how much it means that you're here. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world are you watching from your city. Your country. I read every single one. A quick note: this story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and educational purposes. Any similarity to names or places is coincidental, but everything it teaches you is worth keeping. The elevator doors opened on the 30th floor, and the first thing I noticed was the smell. Gardenias, white and heavy, arranged in towering crystal vases flanking the entrance to the ballroom. My late wife Margaret had grown gardenias along the south fence of our Greenwich home every summer without fail. She said they reminded her that beautiful things required patience. Standing in the corridor of the Pierre Hotel on a Friday evening in October, surrounded by flowers I had not ordered and had not chosen, I felt the particular ache of a man who has learned to carry grief the way others carry, a wallet always present, rarely examined. I straightened my jacket, nodded to the attendant holding the door, and walked inside. The ballroom was extraordinary even by Manhattan standards. The ceiling soared 40 feet above a sea of round tables, dressed in ivory linen, each set with gold-rimmed china and crystal stemware that caught the chandelier light and threw it in every direction. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Central Park spread out 60 stories below, like a dark quilt edged with the amber glow of city street lamps. 200 guests moved and murmured and laughed in that particular way, of people who had arrived to be seen as much as to celebrate. Thomas Greer, the event manager assigned by the Pierre, appeared at my elbow almost immediately. He was a trim man of 48 with silver hair and the practiced calm of someone who had managed 10,000 evenings exactly like this one. "Mr. Whitfield," he said, extending his hand. "Everything is prepared as requested. The sommelier has opened the Burgundy. Your table is center left with full sightlines to the podium." "Thank you, Thomas," I said. "You've done well." He gave a small professional smile and withdrew. I found my table. Preston was already there, standing beside his chair in a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly. My son had always dressed well, a habit he maintained even when he could not afford to. He was 34 years old, and in the candlelight, he looked younger, almost like the boy who used to sit on the dock at the Greenwich House and ask me questions about the stock market that he was far too young to understand. That memory arrived without warning, and I pressed it back down before it could settle. "Dad." He moved toward me and gripped my hand with both of his tighter than necessary. "I'm glad you're here." "Where else would I be?" I said. I meant it to sound warm. I think it landed somewhere closer to obligation. Claudia Reeves stood 2 steps behind him, and she stepped forward now, with the smooth, unhurried confidence of a woman who had rehearsed this moment. She was 32, dark-haired, precisely put together in a midnight blue gown that managed to look both elegant and efficient. She extended her hand. "Conrad," she said. "Thank you for coming." Not Mr. Whitfield, Conrad. As though we were already family. As though the distance between us had already been closed and I simply had not been informed. "Claudia." I shook her hand. Her grip was firm, brief, and entirely deliberate. "You look lovely." She smiled, but the smile did not quite reach her eyes. It stopped somewhere around the cheekbones, perfect and immovable like a detail in a photograph. Across the room, Raymond Castillo, the bartender stationed at the main bar, was moving with quiet efficiency, filling glasses without being asked. Sophie Lane, a young server of perhaps 23 with copper hair pinned back, was threading between tables with a tray of canapes, her expression alert, slightly overwhelmed by the scale of the room. I accepted a glass of water from a passing tray and began working the room the way I had worked boardrooms for 35 years, methodically, observantly, giving each person enough attention to feel seen without giving any of them enough to feel owed. It was during my second circuit of the room, somewhere between a conversation with Preston's university friend and a polite exchange with a couple I barely recognized, that my phone vibrated in my breast pocket. I drew it out and glanced at the screen. Unknown number, 1 line of text. "Don't react, you are in danger. Look at the man carrying the black leather briefcase near the east wall." My chest tightened, but 35 years on Wall Street teaches you one thing above all others. The moment you show your hand, you have already lost. I did not look up immediately. I brought my water glass to my lips, took a slow sip, and let my gaze drift naturally casually toward the east wall. He was there. A man of about 45, heavyset in a way that an expensive suit could not entirely conceal. He carried a black leather briefcase, the kind with reinforced corners and a combination lock pressed flat against his right thigh, as though he wanted it close but not visible. He was speaking to no one. He was watching Preston. My throat went dry, but my face gave nothing. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and returned to my table, greeting two guests along the way with a laugh I did not feel. I sat down. I unfolded my napkin. I studied the first course, a chilled soup that I did not taste, and I waited. 11 minutes later, the phone vibrated again. I read the message under the table. The screen tilted away from Preston, away from Claudia, away from everyone. The man with the briefcase introduced himself to the family as your personal attorney. His name is Fletcher Dunn. He is not licensed to practice law in New York. He is not licensed anywhere. Check the New York State Bar Association directory. He does not exist. My hand tightened around the phone. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. I looked up. Across the table, Claudia Reeves was watching me with an expression that I can only describe as anticipation dressed in politeness. She lifted her wine glass toward me in the smallest of gestures, barely a tilt more suggestion than toast. I lifted mine in return, smiled, and inside my chest, something that had been dormant for years, some cold, precise, utterly patient part of the man I used to be, quietly woke up. The soup was replaced by a salad I did not touch. Around me, 200 people were doing what people do at engagement parties, laughing a little too brightly, complimenting things they did not particularly admire, drinking steadily enough to blur the edges of obligation into something that resembled joy. Preston moved between tables with the restless energy of a man who needed to be liked by everyone in the room simultaneously. Claudia stood wherever she chose to stand and let people come to her. I watched them both. I had spent 35 years reading rooms, reading people. In my years running Whitfield Capital, I had sat across the table from men who smiled while they lied, who shook your hand while their lawyers filed injunctions, who looked you in the eye and said trust me in the precise tone that meant the opposite. I knew performance when I saw it. I knew the difference between a person who was happy and a person who was playing happy for an audience. Claudia Reeves was playing. She was very good at it, but the tell was in her eyes. Every few minutes those dark eyes would find me, not with the warmth of a future daughter-in-law, not with the nervousness of a woman hoping to impress, but with the cool, measuring gaze of someone checking the status of a transaction. I was the transaction. I reached for my water glass and opened the New York State Bar Association directory on my phone beneath the table. I typed in the name from the text message, Fletcher Dunn. The search returned in 4 seconds. No results found. I tried variations. F. Dunn, attorney, New York. Nothing. Fletcher Dunn, Esquire, New York State. Nothing. I expanded the search to New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania. Nothing, nowhere. My jaw tightened. I set the phone face down on my thigh and looked up at exactly the moment Fletcher Dunn began walking toward my table. He was closer now, and I could read him more clearly. 45 years old, perhaps, with the slightly too smooth manner of a man who had learned to imitate authority rather than earn it. His suit was expensive but worn. The cuffs showed a faint shine at the edges that only comes from years of use. The black briefcase moved with him like a companion, never more than 6 inches from his hand. Mr. Whitfield. He stopped beside my chair and extended his right hand. His smile was wide and practiced the kind designed to project trustworthiness rather than actually inspire it. Fletcher Dunn, I've been looking forward to meeting you properly. I've been advising the family on some estate planning matters. Preston mentioned you might want to discuss a few things this evening. I shook his hand. His grip was carefully calibrated, firm enough to project confidence, released quickly enough to avoid challenge. Fletcher, I said pleasantly, I don't believe we've spoken before. No, sir, we haven't. I came on through a referral, professional circles, as they say. He set the briefcase on the edge of the table with a small proprietary confidence as though he had already made himself at home. I handle complex family trust structures, multi-generational asset planning. It's detailed work, but someone has to do it. He gave a short laugh, the laugh of a man who expected others to laugh with him. I did not laugh. Referral from whom? I asked. The question landed half a beat too fast for him. A flicker, barely a flicker, crossed his face. His left hand pressed slightly against the briefcase handle. A mutual contact in the estate planning world, he said smoothly. I'd rather keep the specifics professional, you understand. Confidentiality and all. Of course, I said. Confidentiality. I smiled at him. He smiled back. We understood each other perfectly, and neither of us acknowledged it. He moved away to speak with another guest, and I watched him go with the focused attention of a man who has just identified the shape of a problem and is now calculating its dimensions. It was Sophie Lane who reached me next, the young copper-haired server, circling with a fresh tray of drinks. She set a glass of sparkling water beside my plate without being asked, and as she straightened, I noticed something. A small folded card tucked beneath the base of the glass. White, precise, placed with intention, not accident. I waited until she had moved 3 tables away before I lifted the glass and palmed the card. I unfolded it in my lap. My name is Owen Tate. I work here. I sent the texts. I know what's in the briefcase. I know what they're planning tonight. Please don't let them know you've read this. I'll find a moment to talk. You helped my family once. I haven't forgotten. My chest did something complicated, a tightening that was not quite fear, and not quite grief, and not quite anger, but contained elements of all 3 pressed together until they became something new, something clarifying. Owen Tate. I turned the name over in my mind. I looked up carefully, found him across the room, a young man of 22, lean, dark-haired, moving between tables with the focused efficiency of someone doing 2 things at once. Our eyes met for exactly 1 second. He gave the smallest nod, the kind you could dismiss as coincidence if you needed to, and looked away. I folded the card, slid it into my breast pocket, and picked up my fork. Preston appeared at my shoulder with the uneven brightness of a man who had consumed 2 glasses of wine on a stomach full of anxiety. "Dad, what do you think?" he said, gesturing broadly at the room. "Pretty incredible, right? Claudia organized the whole thing, every detail." "She's thorough," I said carefully. "She's brilliant." Preston's voice carried a warmth that hurt to hear, not because it was false, but because it was real. My son genuinely loved this woman. That single fact made everything else considerably more complicated. "I know you 2 haven't had much time to get close." He continued, lowering his voice slightly, "But tonight, I think tonight is going to change things. She wants us all to feel like a family." I looked at my son. His eyes were bright, earnest, and completely unguarded the way they had always been when he believed in something. My throat tightened around words I could not say. "Then let's make sure it's a good evening," I said. He clapped my shoulder, grinned like the boy on the dock, and moved away to greet someone across the room. I watched him go. And across the table, Claudia Reeves watched me watch him with an expression that I now understood completely. She was not sizing up a father-in-law. She was measuring how much I was worth and how much trouble I would be. Dinner was served at 8 o'clock precisely. The main course arrived on warmed plates, pan-seared duck, with a cherry reduction arranged with the kind of architectural precision that costs more per plate than most people spend on groceries in a week. Raymond Castillo moved along the bar with quiet efficiency, opening a second bottle of Burgundy without being asked. Sophie Lane appeared at each table with the practiced grace of someone trying very hard not to make mistakes, her copper hair catching the chandelier, light each time she leaned forward. I ate without tasting anything. Claudia had chosen the seat directly across from me, which told me everything about how she viewed this evening, not beside Preston, where a woman in love would naturally position herself. Across from me, eyeline to eyeline, position of negotiation, not affection. It was Preston who brought it up, which told me the opening line had been scripted. That, he said, setting down his fork with a brightness that was just slightly too deliberate. "Claudia and I have been working on something we think could really benefit the whole family. Claudia, you want to walk him through it." She did not pretend to hesitate. "Conrad," she said, folding her hands on the table in the manner of someone accustomed to presenting to a room. "Preston and I have been thinking seriously about the family's long-term financial future, your legacy, the assets you've built over 35 years. She paused, and the pause was calibrated long enough to feel respectful, short enough not to lose momentum. "We'd like to propose the formation of a Whitfield Family Trust, a consolidated structure that protects everything you've built and ensures it passes cleanly to the next generation without the exposure of probate estate taxes or outside claims." I set my own fork down. Carefully, I looked at her. "That's a significant proposal for a dinner conversation," I said. "We wanted it to feel personal," she said, "not like a boardroom." "I see." I turned to Preston. "And you've reviewed the specifics of this structure?" Preston's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the jaw of a man who had been coached on this question. "Claudia and Fletcher have gone through everything. Fletcher handles exactly this kind of work. He explained the whole framework to me last week." Fletcher Dunn, seated 2 chairs down, gave a small, affirming nod. His briefcase was on the floor beside his chair, one hand resting on the handle with the casual possessiveness of a man guarding something valuable. "A family trust." I said, keeping my voice conversational, consolidates control of assets into a trustee structure. Depending on how it's written, it can transfer management authority, not just inheritance rights, but active management authority away from the original asset holder. I looked at Claudia. Is that the structure you're proposing? Her expression did not change. It's one variation of the structure, yes. The details are all in the documentation. She nodded to Fletcher. Fletcher lifted the briefcase onto the table, worked the combination lock with practiced fingers, and produced a document roughly an inch thick, bound with a black cover. He slid it across the table toward me. The full proposal, he said. We've had it drafted carefully. Every provision is designed to protect the Whitfield family assets from outside litigation, from tax exposure, from the kinds of vulnerabilities that come with holding significant wealth in individual names. I picked it up. The weight of it was deliberate. Documents designed to overwhelm do not need to be accurate. They need to feel authoritative. I had seen this technique deployed in hostile acquisitions and boardroom coups in the particular variety of financial theater, where the goal is to make the target feel outmatched before they have read a single line. I opened to the first page. Whitfield Family Trust, LLC Articles of Organization and Operating Agreement. Claudia was watching my face. Preston was watching Claudia. Fletcher was watching his briefcase. I read, slowly turning pages with the unhurried attention of a man who has read 10,000 contracts and knows that the dangerous language is never on the first page or the second, or even the fifth. It lives in the footnotes in the defined terms section and the provisions that reference other provisions that reference schedules attached at the rear. This is comprehensive, I said after several minutes. We wanted to be thorough, Claudia said. Her voice carried a warmth that did not quite match the calculation in her eyes. You've worked your whole life to build something real, Conrad. This protects it. Preston leaned forward, and the earnestness on his face was so complete, so unguarded, that my chest ached with it. Dad, I want to make sure that what you built doesn't get picked apart by lawyers and tax courts when you're gone. I want it to mean something. I want it to still be ours. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and I had to look down at the contract because I could not look at his face. My son believed this. Whatever Claudia had told him, whatever Fletcher had explained, Preston genuinely believed this document existed to protect his father's legacy. That understanding did not make me less afraid. It made me considerably more, because it meant my son was not a villain in this story. He was a casualty waiting to happen. I turned another page, and another. I kept my expression neutral. The old CEO faced the face I had worn through 35 years of negotiations, where showing anything real was the same as losing. But my eyes were moving with a precision that had nothing to do with casual reading. I was looking for page 11. Owen's note had said nothing about page 11 specifically. But in 35 years, I had learned that if there was something hidden in a contract, it was never buried in the first third, and rarely in the last. It lived in the middle, where the reader's attention naturally softens. Page 9, page 10. I turned to page 11, and I read the first footnote at the bottom of the page. And every muscle in my body went absolutely still. I did not look up. I did not change my expression. I simply continued turning pages at the same measured pace, as though I had read nothing of consequence. But my heart was slamming against my ribs with the force of a man who has just stepped off a curb and realized mid-fall exactly how far down the ground actually is. I closed the contract. It's a great deal to absorb, I said pleasantly. I'd like to take my time with this. Claudia smiled. Of course, we have all evening. And then from 2 tables away, I caught the scent of shellfish, strong, unmistakable, drifting across the room on the warm air as a new course was set on the tables around us. My allergy, my very specific, very documented, very dangerous allergy. I looked at the plate being placed in front of me. Lobster. I have been allergic to shellfish since I was 19 years old. The first time it happened, I ate 3 shrimp at a client dinner to be polite and spent the next hour in the back of a cab, headed to Bellevue with my throat closing like a fist. The attending physician told me I had come within minutes of a serious crisis. I had carried an epinephrine auto-injector every day since. The injector was in my jacket pocket right now. So, was the antihistamine I had taken at 5:47 p.m. standing in the bathroom of my Greenwich home before the car arrived. 1 tablet, double the standard dose. Not because I had planned for lobster specifically, because Owen's second text had mentioned that Claudia had reviewed the dinner menu personally and made 1 change to the original order. He had not said what the change was. He had not needed to. My shellfish allergy had been mentioned in a 2019 Forbes profile, a single line in a paragraph about executive health habits. Claudia would have read everything written about me. That was not in question. The lobster plate sat in front of me. The smell reached the back of my throat immediately, that particular briny richness my immune system had been treating as an enemy since 1984. My eyes began to water. The antihistamine was managing the deeper response, but the surface symptoms were genuine, arriving with the slow, familiar dread of a man who knows exactly what his body is about to do. 30 seconds, maybe less. I made a decision. I set my wine glass down, with a sound slightly too sharp against the table. My left hand went to my throat, not theatrical, just a man touching his collar because something felt wrong. I cleared my throat once, twice. Then I took a single calculated bite of the garnish, a piece of lobster claw no larger than a thumbnail. In the moment, Preston looked away. Enough to trigger, not enough to endanger. Preston noticed first. Dad," his voice sharpened immediately. "Dad, what's wrong?" "Nothing," I said. My voice came out rougher than intended, which was fortunate because it was honest. "Just the air in here." I coughed. My eyes were streaming. My face felt hot, the flush spreading from my collar to my jaw. "Oh my God!" Preston was on his feet, his chair scraping back hard enough to draw looks from 3 nearby tables. He grabbed my plate, looked at it, and his face went white. "Lobster. Why is there lobster? He's severely allergic." He spun toward the room with the raw, unfiltered panic of a son watching his father turn red at a dinner table. "Someone call an ambulance. Please someone call 911 right now." The room erupted in the contained way. Expensive rooms erupt not with screaming, but with scraping chairs and urgent whispers, and the particular attention a crowd gives to a crisis they cannot help with, but cannot look away from. Thomas Greer was at the table in under 20 seconds, already on his radio. "Medical emergency, 30th floor ballroom. Guest presenting with allergic reaction. Clear the service elevator, now." Owen Tate appeared at my left elbow, materialized from across the room, with the quiet speed of a young man who had been watching for exactly this moment. He crouched beside my chair, one hand steady on my shoulder. "Sir," he said quietly close to my ear, "I've got you. Can you stand?" "Yes," I said low enough that only he could hear. "Good timing." "I know," he said. For just a second, the professional composure cracked enough to show the relief underneath a 22-year-old who had been carrying a very heavy secret and had just watched the plan hold together. Claudia Reeves had not moved. She was still seated, hands folded on the table wine glass, untouched. She was watching me with an expression I will remember for the rest of my life. Not concern, not fear, not even the performance of either. Just flat, rapid calculation. A woman running the numbers on an unexpected variable. For 1 second, one single unguarded second, the mask came down. Disappointment. Not because I was hurt, because I was leaving the room before I had signed the contract. Preston grabbed my arm with both hands, his grip shaking, his voice breaking at the edges. "Dad, I'm so sorry I didn't check the menu. I should have checked. I'm so sorry." "Preston," I put my hand over his. "Look at me." He looked, eyes wet red at the rims, the face of a boy who had watched something terrible happen and could not stop blaming himself. "I am going to be fine," I said, each word placed carefully like stones across a river. "Do you hear me? I am going to be absolutely fine." He nodded, jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle working beneath the skin. Owen and Thomas guided me toward the service corridor. At the entrance, I looked back once. Claudia had picked up her wine glass. She was taking a slow, measured sip, her eyes moving to Fletcher Dunn. Her lips moved something brief, and Fletcher's hand tightened on the contract, still lying on the table. They were not done for the evening. Neither was I. The service elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. The doors closed behind me, and in the sudden quiet of the elevator shaft, 40 floors above the city, I pressed my hand flat against the folded card in my breast pocket. I still had the contract. I still had the footnote on page 11 burned into my memory like a brand. And I still had time. The ambulance smelled like antiseptic, and the particular metallic cold of equipment used many times on many different bodies. I lay on the gurney with an oxygen mask over my face and thought with a clarity that surprised me that I had not felt this awake in years. The paramedic, a broad-shouldered young man, whose name tag read Reyes, was checking my blood pressure with brisk efficiency. His partner was driving. The siren was off. That was telling. A genuine anaphylactic emergency warrants lights and siren the entire way. They had used them leaving the Pierre, but somewhere on 5th Avenue the severity had been reassessed. "A pressure's coming down nicely," Reyes said. "You took antihistamine before the exposure." "Force of habit," I said. "I carry it everywhere." He nodded and moved to check the IV line, and in the 30 seconds his attention shifted, I drew my phone from my jacket pocket and typed a message to a number I had memorized rather than saved. Derek, it's Conrad. I need your full capabilities tonight. Claudia Reeves, age 32, attorney, New York. Fletcher Dunn, age 45, claims to be an estate attorney. Verify bar credentials, corporate filings, any known associates. Also pull everything public on a Gerald Marsh, age approximately 55, finance. Use only public record sources. Nothing that requires access you don't have the right to use. I sent it and returned the phone before Reyes turned back. 3 minutes later, the ambulance pulled into New York Presbyterian on the Upper East Side. The cold October air hit me like a hand pressed flat against my face, sharp and clarifying. They wheeled me through automatic doors and into the controlled brightness of the emergency department. Dr. Patricia Hale met the gurney at the assessment bay. She was 50 trim and composed with silver-streaked hair and the quiet authority of a physician who has seen genuine emergencies and knows how to distinguish them from the ones that merely look like emergencies. She reviewed the paramedic's notes, checked, my eyes listened to my chest. Your reaction was real, she said. But the severity is significantly lower than what was reported at the scene. The antihistamine you took earlier has done considerable work. A pause, not accusatory, simply precise. You're going to be fine. I know, I said. She kept me for observation and moved on. Nurse Claire Dunmore took her place 35, with observant gray eyes and hands that moved without hesitation. She attached monitoring leads to my chest, her eyes moving between equipment and my face in the way of someone paid to notice things. Water, she asked. Please, I said, and leave the curtain open. She filed that request somewhere in her mind and went to get the water. My phone buzzed. Derek under 8 minutes. First pass on Fletcher Dunn. No active bar license in any U.S. jurisdiction. Criminal record flagged Southern District of Florida, 2019. Details still incoming. Claudia Reeves, search in progress. Gerald Marsh, preliminary hit. Known figure in private lending circles. Not licensed as a financial institution. Operating through Shell LLCs, more soon. I read it twice. Set the phone face down on my chest. Closed my eyes for 10 seconds, not to rest, but to let the full shape of what I was dealing with settle into place. Fletcher Dunn, convicted document fraudster, presented tonight as a family attorney, carrying a contract he expected me to sign. The footsteps I heard next were Preston's. I knew them before. I saw him the quick, slightly uneven stride of a man moving faster than he meant to. He came around the curtain and stopped, and the expression on his face broke something open in me that I had been keeping carefully closed all evening. He looked 19 again. He looked like the boy who had called me from a payphone in Boston the night his college roommate was in an accident, voice shaking so hard he could barely form words. Dad. His voice cracked on the single syllable. Eyes red-tie, loosened hands gripping the curtain rail so hard his knuckles had gone white. Dad, I am so sorry. I didn't know there was lobster on that menu. I should have checked everything myself, and I didn't, and I... Preston. I reached out my hand. Come here. He crossed the bay in 2 steps and took my hand with both of his the way he had as a small child. The trembling in his fingers traveled up my arm and settled somewhere near my heart. I'm here, I said. Look at me. He looked. His jaw was working hard against whatever was trying to come out, eyes bright with the specific wet brightness of a man fighting tears he considers unacceptable. I love you, Dad. His grip tightened. I know I don't say it enough. I just need you to know that. I held his hand and looked at my son's face and felt the full weight of what was coming, what I knew, what he did not know, and what the next several hours were going to cost both of us. I know, I said quietly. I know you do. Claire Dunmore returned with the water, set it on the tray, and withdrew. But her eyes moved once between my face and Preston's, and registered something that careful nurses register and do not say aloud. Something was happening in this room that went beyond an allergic reaction. She was right. It had barely started. Derek's full report arrived at 10:47 p.m. Preston was sitting beside my bed, with his elbows on his knees and his head slightly bowed, the posture of a man doing penance. The guilt was sitting on him, like physical weight. I read Derek's report with the phone angled away from him, screen brightness turned low. Full report on Fletcher Dunn. Born 1979, Tampa, Florida. No law degree from any accredited institution. No bar examination record in any U.S. jurisdiction. 1 criminal conviction. United States versus Fletcher Raymond Dunn, Southern District of Florida, 2019. Wire fraud, identity misrepresentation, and unlawful practice of a regulated profession. Represented himself as a licensed estate attorney to 3 separate clients, drafted fraudulent documents, collected fees totaling $340,000. Guilty plea, October 2019. Sentenced to 22 months, served 14 months at FCY. Miami released March 2021. Currently on supervised release until March 2025. I set the phone face down on my chest. Something moved through me. Not hot fury, but cold and exact. The kind that arrives when you understand not just that you have been wronged, but precisely how, by whom, and with what degree of premeditation. Fletcher Dunn had walked into the Pierre tonight, carrying a contract he had no legal authority to prepare or present. He had introduced himself as a licensed attorney to my son, to me, to an entire room of people. And the contract was still in my jacket pocket, hanging on the chair beside my bed. A knock at the door. Nurse Claire Dunmore leaned in. "Mr. Whitfield, there's a young man asking for you. Owen Tate. He says he was working the event tonight and that you'd want to see him." Her gray eyes moved briefly to Preston and back. "He seems genuinely anxious." Preston looked up. He did not recognize the name. "Send him in," I said. Owen Tate stepped into the room, still in his server's uniform vest. Unbuttoned collar, opened, the careful formality of the evening dissolved. He was 22 and looked it right now. The composure he had maintained all evening stripped back to reveal a young man who had spent 2 hours with his hands shaking, waiting to find out if his gamble had cost something irreplaceable. His eyes found mine. The relief on his face was sudden and complete, like a breath released after being held underwater. "Mr. Whitfield," he said, "I'm glad you're okay." Preston was on his feet. "Who are you?" "My name is Owen Tate, sir. I was one of the servers at your event tonight." A pause. "I'm the one who sent your father the text messages this evening." The room went very quiet. Preston turned to me slowly. His face cycled through expressions too fast to catalog confusion, then something sharper, then the particular blankness he wore when working very hard not to show what he was actually feeling. "You knew," he said, voice low, entirely level, the way voices go level when the emotion underneath is too large to let any through. "You knew something was wrong before it happened. I knew someone had warned me," I said carefully. "I did not know the full scope of it." "Why didn't you say something?" He stopped, his hands pressed flat against the sides of his head, fingers pushing into his hair. He turned to the window. His shoulders rose and fell with one slow, effortful breath. "God." Owen reached into his vest pocket and produced a folded piece of paper, printed prepared in advance. He handed it to me. A New York State Bar Association search result. Search field, Fletcher Dunn. Results field, empty. Below it, a Pacer case summary. United States versus Fletcher Raymond Dunn. Southern District of Florida, 2019. He had found the same information Derek had found, independently, by himself. "How did you know to look?" I asked. "Because she made me look up a lawyer once before," he said. "I learned what a clean result looks like and what a missing result looks like." His jaw tightened. "Ms. Reeves was a client at the tech firm where I worked before the Pierre. She asked for things that weren't standard. I left that job, but I recognized her the moment the event booking came through." Preston turned from the window, eyes red, voice rough at the edges. "What does Claudia have to do with any of this?" I looked at my son. "Come sit down, Preston." "Look, please." He came. He sat. He pressed his hands together between his knees and looked at me the way he had not in years, without the layer of adult dignity, without the practiced ease of a man managing a relationship. Just looking. Just waiting. "Fletcher Dunn presented himself as a licensed estate attorney tonight," I said. "He is not. He has never held a bar license anywhere in this country. In 2019, he was convicted in federal court of wire fraud and unlawful practice of law." I reached to my jacket and produced the contract, setting it on the bed between us. "Under New York Judiciary Law, Section 478. What he did tonight is a criminal offense. The contract is void." "But Preston," I waited until his eyes came back to my face. "The contract is not the whole plan. It never was." Owen leaned against the wall, watching Preston with the careful attention of someone who knows more than he has said and is waiting for the right moment. Preston's hands were shaking now. Not grief this time. The particular trembling of a man beginning to understand that the ground beneath him is not what he thought it was. "What is the whole plan?" he whispered. I reached for the contract, turned to page 11, and pressed my thumb against the footnote at the bottom of the page. That I said starts here. I read the footnote aloud, slowly, without inflection. Notwithstanding the provisions of Section 4.2, the parties acknowledge the existence of a prior financial obligation, documented under reference number MCH-2023-0047, owed by Preston James Whitfield to Marsh Capital Holdings LLC in an amount to be reconciled upon execution of this agreement. Satisfaction of said obligation shall be treated as a distribution from the trust corpus subject to trustee approval, said trustee authority vesting in Claudia M. Reeves upon execution of this instrument. The room went very quiet. Preston had not moved. He was staring at the contract, with the expression of a man staring at something he recognized, but had prayed he would never have to see in this particular light. "Preston, look at me." He looked up, and I saw at the exact moment the last wall came down. His face crumpled all at once the way a structure collapses when the load-bearing element gives way. His jaw shook. He pressed his fist against his mouth so hard his knuckles went white. The sound that came out of him was rougher and more broken than a sob, the sound of a man who had been holding something underwater for a very long time and had finally lost the strength to keep it down. "I'm sorry," he said. "Dad, I'm so sorry." I reached across and put my hand on the back of his neck, the way I had when he was small and sick and frightened. Owen turned quietly to face the window. Preston cried without dignity, shoulders shaking breath, ragged tears running unchecked. After a long moment, he dragged in a breath and began to speak. "It started 2 years ago. Gambling debts. The numbers got away from me. Someone introduced me to Gerald Marsh, a private lender, discreet, no bank involvement. I borrowed $2.3 million at 8% monthly." His voice steadied as the confession took over from the shame. "I thought I could repay it in 3 months. I couldn't. By the time I met Claudia, the debt had grown to $8.7 million. She said she knew how to fix it. All she needed was the trust." My phone buzzed. Derek's second report. Gerald Marsh, age 55. No licensed financial institution registration. Operates through shell LLCs, including Marsh Capital Holdings. Subject of 2 prior federal investigations, neither resulting in prosecution due to witness recantation. Under 18 U.S.C. 892 and 893, extortionate credit transactions are federal criminal offenses. Preston's name appears linked to MCH-2023-0047. Confirmed outstanding $8.7 million. Marsh has people. Preston may be in physical danger. I set the phone down. Owen turned from the window. His eyes were bright with the urgency of someone who has been sitting on information too long. "There is something else," he said. "She never intended for Mr. Preston to benefit from the trust. I saw an earlier draft on her screen 6 weeks ago. The trust removes your assets into a structure she controls and leaves Mr. Preston still liable for the full debt with nothing left to pay it." Preston's hands gripped his knees until the fabric gathered in his fists. "She was going to—" "Yes," Owen said simply. Preston bent forward, forehead dropping toward his hands, looking like a man who had simply run out of the physical resources required to remain upright. I composed a message to Derek. I need everything on Claudia Reeves, her father, any professional connection to me, whatever she has been building toward. I sent it, set the phone down. "We are going to fix this, Preston," I said. "I give you my word." He lifted his face, eyes devastated, red-rimmed, stripped of everything. "How?" he whispered. "One step at a time." The clock on the observation room wall read 12:17 a.m. when Preston's phone rang. He had been sitting quietly for 20 minutes, working through a cup of terrible hospital coffee eyes, fixed on the middle distance in the particular way of someone sorting through debris after a collapse. The ring broke the quiet, like a stone through glass. Preston looked at the screen. The color left his face so completely and so instantly that I thought for a moment he was going to lose consciousness. His hand began to shake, not slightly, not politely, but in full visible tremors that sloshed the coffee against the rim. He turned the screen toward me without a word. The caller ID read GM. 2 letters. No name saved. The kind of contact entry a man creates when he does not want anyone who picks up his phone to understand what they are looking at. Owen was on his feet before I spoke. "Don't answer yet," I said. I took Preston's wrist not to restrain him, but to steady him. "In New York, you can legally record a phone call as long as one person consents. If you consent and I record from beside you, everything he says becomes evidence. Do you understand?" Preston's jaw was working. He nodded. Do you consent? Yes, barely above a breath. I opened the voice memo on my phone, pressed record, and placed it face up on the bed between us. Preston answered. His eyes closed for 1 second, the eyes of a man stepping off a ledge he had been standing on for 2 years. Hello. His voice was almost steady. Almost. Gerald Marsh spoke in a low, almost conversational tone, the measured cadence of someone so accustomed to having power over others that he no longer needed to perform it. Preston, I heard there was some excitement at the Pierre tonight. I hope your father is recovering well. Preston's free hand gripped the bed rail, knuckles bone white. He's fine. Good. Family is important. A pause waited with patience. Tonight was supposed to be the resolution point. The trust was to be executed and funds transferred within 48 hours. That hasn't happened, which means we return to our original agreement, and our original agreement has penalties for non-performance. Preston made a sound that was not quite a word, something small and compressed somewhere between his chest and his throat. Tears were running down his face. He was holding completely still, the way prey animals hold still when they understand that movement makes things worse. Mr. Marsh, his voice cracked. I need more time, please. Just a few more days. You've had 18 months, Preston. The gentleness evaporated. 48 hours. After that, my associates will need to discuss the matter with you directly. I'm sure you remember how that conversation goes. The line went dead. Preston lowered the phone and sat without moving. Then, his whole body deflated, shoulders dropping, spine curving. He pressed one hand over his eyes, and a sound came out of him that I had not heard since he was 11 years old, standing in a kitchen doorway convinced that the world was ending. I'm going to prison, he said, or end up in a river, one or the other. Neither, I said. I stopped the recording, forwarded it to Derek with one line Marsh called Preston. Recording attached. New York one-party consent applies. Get this to the right person. Then I typed a message to a number I had memorized 3 months ago, Agent Dana Morse of the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. This was not cold contact. We had been building the evidentiary foundation of this case quietly for weeks. But tonight was the first time I had hard evidence in my hands that could move the process from investigation to action, a recording, a contract, and a confession. This is Conrad Whitfield, former CEO Whitfield Capital. I have evidence of federal wire fraud extortionate lending under 18 U.S.C. 892 unauthorized practice of law and attempted financial fraud against a protected family asset totaling $47 million. I also have a recorded phone call from the individual at the center of this scheme made within the last 30 minutes. I need to speak with you tonight. This is time sensitive. I sent it. Owen had crossed to Preston's side and crouched beside the chair, not touching, not speaking, simply present in the way young people sometimes know how to be present that older people forget. You answered that call, Owen said quietly. You let them record it. That was brave. Preston let out a sound between a laugh and something that hurt. It didn't feel brave. It never does, Owen said. That's usually how you know it counts. My phone buzzed. 4 minutes, 8 words. Stay where you are. I'm coming to you. I set the phone on my chest and felt something shift in the architecture of the night, a load-bearing element clicking into new alignment. Preston's voice came from across the room, rough and small. Hey, Dad, what did you just do? I looked at my son, 34 years old, frightened, gambling debts and bad decisions, and a woman who had used his worst instincts against him with surgical precision. I called someone who can help, I said. Rest while you can. The next few hours are going to require everything you have. He nodded, once leaned his head back and closed his eyes. The tears on his face dried where they were. And somewhere across Manhattan, Agent Dana Morse was getting in a car. Before we go further, this is the moment the story turns. Comment still here, or just drop a 9 below, so I know you're with me. Every comment means more than you know. This story includes elements of fiction woven in for educational purposes. It may not reflect events exactly as they occurred. If that concerns you, feel free to step away now. For everyone staying, let's continue. Owen told me everything at 1:34 a.m. I had asked Preston to step into the corridor, framing it as needing him to speak with Nurse Claire about the discharge paperwork, which was not entirely untrue since Dr. Hale had indicated I could be released by morning. Preston had gone without argument, recognizing I think that his father needed a moment that did not include him. When the door closed, I looked at Owen directly. Before Agent Morse arrives, I said, I need you to tell me everything, not the parts you think I need to know. Everything. Because federal agents do not ask questions they do not already have partial answers to. And walking into that conversation with gaps is considerably more dangerous than walking in with the full truth. Owen sat very still for a moment. His hands rested on his knees, and he looked at them, and I watched something move across his face, a complicated internal negotiation between the instinct to protect himself and the understanding that protection had a new shape now. He looked up. Before I worked at the Pierre, he said I was a junior IT technician at a firm called Reeves Digital Consulting, Claudia's company. She ran it as a separate entity from her law practice. Officially, it handled cybersecurity auditing for law firms, helping them identify vulnerabilities in their systems. He paused. That was the official function. And the unofficial function, I said. Owen's jaw tightened. Finding the vulnerabilities and using them, not patching them. Accessing client databases, document management systems, privileged communication records. She had 3 firms she targeted over about 14 months. All of them were opposing counsel in cases where her law practice was involved. He exhaled slowly. She told me it was penetration testing, authorized security assessments. I was 20 years old, and I needed the job, and I believed her for about 4 months. And then I found a folder on the shared server. His voice dropped slightly. Labeled with the name of a federal judge. Inside it were communications between that judge and opposing counsel in a case Claudia was litigating. Private communications, the kind that should have been inaccessible. He pressed his lips together. I understood then what I had been part of. I gave 30 days' notice the following Monday, and I left. Did you take anything with you? Any records? No. He met my eyes steadily. I was afraid. I was 20 years old, and I was afraid of what she would do if I took anything. I just left. A beat. I've regretted that every day since. I studied him for a long moment. 22 years old, sitting in a hospital room at 2 a.m, carrying 2 years of guilt and fear, wearing a server's uniform, with the collar open, hands steady, now that the telling was done. Owen, I said, what Claudia directed you to do likely constitutes a violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Unauthorized access to protected computer systems. That is a federal statute with serious penalties. He nodded. He had known this. He had been knowing it for 2 years. However, I continued, federal prosecutors have significant discretion in how they treat cooperating witnesses who acted under coercion and who did not personally benefit from the criminal conduct. If you tell Agent Morse everything you told me completely voluntarily and accurately, and if you provide testimony and any corroborating details, you can recall the standard outcome for someone in your position is a non-prosecution agreement. An NPA means the government formally agrees not to charge you in exchange for your full cooperation. It is not immunity, it is a decision by the U.S. Attorney's Office that your evidence is worth more than a conviction. Owen's throat moved. You sound very sure of that. I am not a lawyer, I said, but I have sat across the table from enough federal prosecutors to know how they think. The target here is Claudia Reeves. You are a witness. The difference between those two things is enormous. And it is in your interest to make that difference as clear as possible, as early as possible. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Why are you helping me? You barely know me. The question was so direct and so genuine that it caught me slightly off guard. I thought about it honestly before I answered. Because you helped me tonight when you had no obligation to, I said. And because you are 22 years old and you made a mistake that someone considerably older and considerably more dishonest created the conditions for. Those are sufficient reasons. Owen nodded slowly. His eyes were bright but steady. Okay, he said. Okay, I'll tell her everything. The door opened at 2:03 a.m. Agent Dana Morse was 42 years old, and she looked like someone who had been awake for 20 hours and intended to be awake for 20 more without making a particular issue of it. She was medium height, dark-suited, with close-cropped hair and eyes that moved through the room with the systematic efficiency of a person, cataloging everything simultaneously. The monitors, the contract on the bed, Owen me, the position of the chairs. Behind her came Agent Paul Strickland, 45 tall and lean, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a leather satchel over one shoulder. He was the financial analyst, and he registered the contract on the bed before he registered anything else in the room, which told me everything I needed to know about his priorities. Mr. Whitfield, Morse extended her hand. Her grip was brief and entirely businesslike. I'm Special Agent Dana Morse, FBI Financial Crimes Unit. This is Agent Paul Strickland, our forensic financial analyst. She glanced at Owen. And you are? Owen Tate, Owen said. He stood as he said it, not defensively, but with the straightening posture of someone who has decided to be fully present for what comes next. I have information relevant to what Mr. Whitfield contacted you about, and I have some things to disclose about my own involvement. I'd like to do that voluntarily and completely. Morse looked at him for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked at me. He's been forthcoming with me, I said. Everything he knows is relevant and everything he's told me is consistent. He acted under coercion and he walked away when he understood what was happening. Morse nodded once. All right, Mr. Tate. We'll take your statement separately. She pulled a chair to the side of my bed, sat and opened a thin notebook. Mr. Whitfield, start from the beginning of this evening. I want everything, the texts, the contract, the dinner, the call from Marsh. Leave nothing out. Strickland had already picked up the contract from my bed and was moving toward the light fixture in the corner, holding pages up to it with the focused attention of a man reading something he has been looking for. Page 11, I said to him. Bottom footnote. He found it in and under a minute. I watched his expression. The practiced neutrality of a financial professional reading evidence registers something that was not quite surprise, but was in the vicinity of it. MCH-2023-0047. He said almost to himself, Marsh Capital Holdings. He looked at Morse. Dana, we've seen this LLC before. Morse's pen stopped moving. She looked up from her notebook. Where? The Delancey case, Strickland said. 2022. We could never tie the shell structure to a principle. The witness recanted. A look passed between them, the compressed, efficient communication of two people who have worked together long enough to conduct entire conversations in single glances. Morse turned back to me. Her eyes had changed, not warmer exactly, but sharper, more focused. The look of a person who has just understood that what they came here to investigate is considerably larger than the call she received. Mr. Whitfield, she said, I think you'd better tell me everything from the very beginning, and I think tonight is going to be longer than either of us planned. I settled back against the pillow. Agent Morse, I said, I've been waiting to have this conversation since approximately 8:15 this evening. I'm prepared to take as long as necessary. She almost smiled. Almost. And across the room, Agent Strickland turned to page 12 and 13 and kept reading his glasses now, down from his forehead and pressed against his face, and the quiet scratch of Morse's pen against her notebook was the only sound in the room for a very long time. Morse took my statement for 91 minutes. She was a precise interviewer, not aggressive, not leading, but relentless in the way that good investigators are relentless, circling back to details I had already provided and approaching them from different angles until she was satisfied that the shape of what I was telling her was consistent from every direction. Strickland sat to her left, with the contract open across his knees, making annotations in the margins, with a mechanical pencil occasionally interrupting to ask a specific financial question that told me he had already identified the same structural problems I had found. By 3:30 a.m., the statement was complete. Morse closed her notebook and looked at me with the measured expression of a woman processing a large quantity of information against a framework of existing knowledge. The contract is fraudulent on its face, she said. Fletcher Dunn, presenting himself as a licensed attorney and charging fees for legal services, constitutes wire fraud, an unauthorized practice of law. The footnote referencing Marsh Capital Holdings establishes a direct link between the trust structure and a known unlicensed lending operation. She paused. What I need to establish before we can move is the full chain of intent. Who designed this structure, who directed its execution, and what the intended financial outcome was. The intended outcome, Strickland said, not looking up from the contract, is fairly clear from the document itself. Under Section 7.4 upon execution, Claudia Reeves assumes sole trustee authority. Under Section 9.1, trustee authority includes the power to liquidate and redistribute trust assets at the trustee's discretion. Under the indemnification clause on page 11, the first distribution from the trust corpus is the Marsh debt $8.7 million transferred directly to Marsh Capital Holdings. He turned a page. After that distribution, the remaining corpus, approximately $38 million at current valuation, sites under Claudia Reeves's sole control. Preston Whitfield receives a nominal beneficiary interest with no management rights. Meaning, Morse said, looking at me, Preston signs away his father's assets, pays his debt to Marsh, and ends up with nothing. Except the debt doesn't actually get paid, I said. Not fully. The document says the Marsh obligation is satisfied upon transfer, but Marsh's agreement with Preston is separate from this contract. Whatever Claudia promised Marsh privately may be entirely different from what the trust document states. Strickland looked up for the first time in 20 minutes. She's skimming. That is my reading, I said. She pays Marsh a portion enough to satisfy their private arrangement and keeps the remainder for herself. Preston thinks his debt is cleared. Marsh gets what Claudia agreed to pay him privately. And Claudia walks away with somewhere between $15 and $20 million of assets that were never hers. Morse made a note. And Preston, still legally liable for whatever portion of the $8.7 Marsh doesn't consider settled, I said. Which could be everything if Claudia and Marsh's private arrangement is for a fraction of the stated amount. Preston would have signed away his inheritance and still owe Marsh money. The room was quiet for a moment. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. Derek's third report, the longest one yet. I read it slowly, aware that Morse was watching my face, aware that whatever was in this report was going to change the shape of the conversation. I read it once quickly for the facts. Then I read it again slowly for the meaning. Then I set the phone down and sat very still for what was probably 15 seconds, but felt considerably longer. Mr. Whitfield, Morse said. What is it, no? I looked at her, then at Strickland. Then I picked up the phone and turned the screen toward them. Claudia Reeves's full legal name, I said, is Claudia Bernard Reeves. Her father was Bernard Reeves. 15 years ago, Bernard Reeves was my business partner at Whitfield Capital. Strickland's pencil stopped moving. I terminated that partnership in 2009. I continued. My voice was steady, but something behind my sternum was not. Bernard had been misappropriating client funds, redirecting small percentages of managed portfolios into accounts he controlled. The amounts were not catastrophic individually, but across several hundred clients over 3 years, they totaled approximately $4 million. I discovered it during a routine internal audit. I gave Bernard the option to repay the funds and resign quietly or face a formal SEC referral. He chose to resign. And the SEC referral, Morse asked. I made it anyway, I said, because the clients whose funds had been taken deserved restitution and a record regardless of Bernard's resignation. He was barred from the securities industry for life. He lost his professional licenses. He lost his reputation. I looked at the phone screen. He died in 2012, cardiac arrest. He was 58 years old. The words sat in the room with a weight that was difficult to describe. Morse's pen was not moving. She was watching me with an expression that was neither sympathy nor judgment, simply the focused attention of someone absorbing a piece of information that recontextualizes everything preceding it. Claudia would have been 17 when you terminated the partnership, Strickland said quietly. 18, I said. Old enough to understand what had happened, old enough to watch her father lose everything, old enough to decide what to do about it. I pressed my hand flat on the table, feeling the cool surface against my palm, grounding myself in the physical reality of the room. She has been building this for 15 years, the law degree, the practice, the relationship with Preston, all of it directed toward this. I gestured toward the contract. Tonight, Morse leaned back in her chair. For the first time since she had walked into the hospital room, she allowed herself a moment that was not purely operational. A breath, a slight adjustment of posture, the minimal external signal of a person recalibrating. This changes the scope of the charges, she said. Premeditated financial fraud executed over a period of years, potentially a decade, adds conspiracy charges, potentially RICO implications, if we can establish Marsh as a knowing participant in the overall scheme. The recorded call from Marsh tonight, I said, establishes his knowledge that the trust execution was the resolution mechanism for Preston's debt. He knew the trust existed. He knew Claudia was the mechanism. That is coordination. All that Strickland said is conspiracy. I thought about Bernard Reeves. I had not thought about him in years, not consciously, not by name. He had been a chapter, a difficult chapter, a chapter I had closed with the conviction that I had done the right thing, and the discomfort that doing the right thing had cost a man his livelihood. I had not been wrong. Bernard had stolen from clients who trusted him. The decision to refer him to the SEC had been correct. But correctness, I understood now, does not neutralize consequence. The right decision had produced a devastated family. And that devastated family had produced Claudia Bernard Reeves, brilliant patient and absolutely merciless. The door to the consultation room opened and Preston stepped in. He had been in the corridor for over 2 hours, and he looked pale, exhausted, holding a paper cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. He looked at the faces in the room and understood immediately that something significant had shifted. "What happened?" he said. I looked at my son. I thought about how to say what needed to be said. I thought about Claudia's face across the dinner table, the precision of her, the patience of her, the 10 years of architecture she had built toward a single night that had not gone as planned. "Sit down, Preston," I said. "There is something about Claudia's past that you need to understand. And I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you is not about blame. It is about the full picture." He sat, his hands wrapped around the cold cup, seeking warmth that was no longer there. And I began to tell him about his father's oldest sin and the daughter it had made. Before I play you what was on that recording, drop a 11 in the comments, just so I know who stayed long enough to hear the truth. Because the next 60 seconds are going to reframe everything you thought you understood about this evening. A note before we continue this story. Carries fictional elements built for educational and narrative purposes. Not every detail reflects documented fact. If you would rather not continue on those terms, now is the moment to step away. For those remaining, you will want to hear this. I told Preston everything. I told him about the internal audit of 2009, the discrepancies that had appeared in client portfolio reports, the 3 months of quiet investigation. Before I was certain, the morning I sat across the desk from Bernard Reeves and laid the documentation in front of him and watched the color leave his face. I told him about the choice I had offered Bernard and the choice Bernard had made, and I told him about the SEC referral I had made anyway, because the clients he had stolen from deserved a record even if they never saw a dollar of restitution. I told him Bernard had died in 2012, and I told him that the woman he had asked to marry him had spent the better part of a decade building a legal career, a professional reputation, and a relationship with my son, with the specific patient architectural purpose of destroying everything I had spent my life constructing. Preston listened without interrupting. He held the cold coffee cup throughout, never drinking from it, turning it slowly between his palms, the way people handle objects when their hands need something to do, while the rest of them absorbs something enormous. When I finished, he set the cup down on the bedside table with a care that was almost tender, as though the cup were something fragile, as though he needed to be gentle with something, because everything else had just become too large for gentleness. He pressed both hands flat on his thighs. "She told me," he said, "that she loved me." His voice was entirely level. That frightened me more than the crying had. "She told me I was the first person who had ever really understood her. She said her father's death had left her alone in the world, and that finding me had been..." He stopped. His jaw tightened to the point where I could see the muscle working beneath the skin. His eyes were dry and very bright, the brightness of eyes that have used up their tears and arrived somewhere beyond them. "She said finding me had been like coming home." Agent Morse, seated in the corner of the observation room, had her notebook open but was not writing. She was watching Preston with the focused, careful attention of a trained investigator who understands that a witness in emotional distress is also a witness providing evidence, and that both of those things are true simultaneously and require different kinds of attention. "Mr. Whitfield," she said after a moment, "I want you to know that what you've just described, the deliberate cultivation of a romantic relationship for the purpose of financial fraud, constitutes a specific category of federal offense. It does not diminish what you experienced. It categorizes it, and it carries significant sentencing weight." Preston looked at her. Something moved across his face that I could not entirely name. Not gratitude, not relief, but something in that territory. The recognition that what had been done to him had a name and a legal weight, and that the law considered it serious. "Thank you," he said. "Mr. Whitfield." Morse shifted her attention to me. "You mentioned earlier that you had an audio recording from this evening. I'd like to hear it." I reached under the bed where Owen had placed my jacket, hung over the back of a chair within arm's reach. From the interior lining, I unclipped the device, a narrow cylinder, approximately 4 inches long, matte black, no larger than a thick pen. I set it on the bedside table. 3 months ago, I said, a colleague who works in private security advised me that, if my suspicions about Claudia Reeves were correct, contemporaneous audio documentation would be the difference between allegation and evidence. I had this device installed by a licensed private security firm. It is voice-activated, encrypted, and transmits to a secure server registered in my name. The installation is documented, the firm is licensed in New York, and I am the owner of both the device and the cane it was installed in. Strickland leaned forward. "Chain of custody." "Complete," I said. The firm that installed it provided a signed documentation package. The server logs show every transmission with timestamp and duration. I can have the full documentation to you within the hour. Morse looked at the device for a moment. Under New York one-party consent, a recording made in a hotel ballroom, a semi-public venue where you were a participant or present party to the relevant conversations, is admissible. We'll want our technical team to authenticate the file, but I can evaluate the content tonight. She paused. Play it. I accessed the server from my phone, navigated to the evening's file, and pressed play. The room filled with the ambient sound of the Pierre Hotel ballroom, the murmur of 200 guests, the clink of stemware, the soft orchestral music that had played throughout the first hour of the evening. Then Claudia's voice captured with startling clarity at close range as she leaned across the table toward Fletcher Dunn, during a moment when Preston and I had both been engaged elsewhere. Her voice was different in the recording, not the warm, measured Claudia of the engagement party performance. This was another register, entirely clipped, precise, entirely stripped of the social warmth she had deployed all evening. He hasn't read past page 3. I watched his eyes. We're on schedule. The moment the old man signs the signature block on page 47, the trust is executed and trustee authority transfers immediately. Don't let Preston see you handle the pen. Use the one in your left breast pocket, not the one you showed him. Fletcher's response lower and slightly obscured by background noise. And if Whitfield Sr. asks about the Marsh reference, "Oh, Kurt, und dixist," Claudia, he won't. Men like Conrad Whitfield don't read footnotes at engagement parties. They sign where they're told and trust their family. That's the vulnerability. That's always been the vulnerability. A pause, then Fletcher again, and Preston. Claudia's voice, 3 words, delivered with the flat, efficient economy of someone discussing a logistical detail rather than a human being. Preston is the mechanism. The recording continued, but I paused it there. The silence in the observation room was total. Nurse Claire Dunmore, who had come to check my monitors and had stopped in the doorway when she heard Claudia's voice from the phone, pressed one hand against the doorframe. Her face had gone pale. She looked at Preston. Preston had not moved. He was sitting exactly as he had been sitting, hands on thighs, spine straight, eyes fixed on the phone, lying on the bed between us. But something had happened to his face. Not crying, not fury, not collapse. Something quieter and more absolute than any of those things. The expression of a man who has just heard the precise vocabulary used to describe him by the person he trusted most in the world, and who is in the process of understanding that some information once received permanently reorganizes the interior landscape of a person. Preston is the mechanism. His throat moved. "Play the rest," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it was entirely steady. I looked at him. "Preston, play the rest of it, Dad." His eyes came to mine, and they were dry and very dark and completely resolved. "I want to hear all of it. I need to hear all of it. Don't protect me from it." Morse gave me a small nod. I pressed play. The recording continued for another 23 minutes, Claudia and Fletcher discussing contingencies. Claudia's brief murmured call to an unknown number during the cocktail hour, a call in which she confirmed that the transfer window would open within the hour and that the secondary arrangement with GM was still active. Claudia later in the evening in what appeared to be a private corridor conversation, saying in a voice so low it had barely registered on the device, "If the old man makes trouble, the Marsh situation becomes Preston's problem entirely. That's what he signed up for when he came to me." When the recording ended, no one in the room spoke for a long moment. Strickland removed his glasses and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. Morse was writing steadily, her pen, moving without pause. Preston stood up from the chair. He walked to the window, the small window with its view of the institutional courtyard and its single overhead light. And he stood there with his back to the room and his hands in his pockets and his shoulders held with a controlled precision that told me exactly how much effort it was costing him to keep himself together. "She was going to leave me to Marsh," he said. "To the window, to the courtyard, to no one in particular. After all of it, after everything she said, she was going to take the money and leave me to Marsh." "Yes," I said, because he deserved the honest answer, and because softening it would have been a form of contempt dressed as compassion. His shoulders rose and fell once, a single slow breath. Then he turned from the window. His face was composed, not healed, not resolved, but composed the composure of someone who has decided that what comes next requires him to be functional and has made that choice deliberately. "What do we do now?" he said. Morse looked up from her notebook. "Now," she said, "I make some calls." She stood, buttoned her jacket, and walked to the door. Then she paused, one hand on the frame, precisely where Nurse Claire had stood 5 minutes earlier, and looked back at me. Mr. Whitfield, the recording, the contract, the Marsh Call, Owen Tate's testimony, and Derek Stone's public records documentation give us enough to move. I'll have warrants by morning." She walked out. Strickland gathered the contract, tucked it into his satchel, and followed her, pausing just long enough to look at Preston, with the brief neutral nod of a man who has seen a great deal of human damage in his career and has learned to acknowledge it without diminishing it. The door closed, and in the observation room, in the thin gray light that precedes dawn, in a city that never fully darkens, a father and his son looked at each other across the distance of everything that had happened and everything that was still to come. Dawn came slowly to the courtyard outside the observation room window, not dramatically, not with color or warmth. This was a Manhattan dawn, gray and gradual, the darkness thinning by degrees until the courtyard light switched itself off with a soft, mechanical click. I had been watching it happen for 20 minutes, my jacket folded across my knees, thinking about nothing in particular and everything simultaneously. Preston had fallen asleep in the chair beside the bed. He was sleeping with his mouth slightly open and one hand loosely curled around the arm of the chair, and he looked in the gray early light, younger than his 34 years. He looked like someone who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had finally, in exhaustion rather than resolution, put it down. I watched him sleep and felt the particular ache of a father who loves his child and knows that love is not the same as the ability to protect them from every consequence of their own choices. A soft knock at the door. Owen Tate stepped in his server's uniform, exchanged for a gray sweatshirt and dark jeans. He looked at Preston sleeping, then at me, and crossed the room, quietly pulling a chair to the other side of the bed. "I finished with the agents," he said, keeping his voice low. "Agent Morse said my cooperation would be documented. She said the outcome for people like me was usually manageable." "That is a very specific word for a federal agent to choose," I said. "It means she intends to make good on it." Some of the tension that had been living in his shoulders since I had met him released slightly, not completely, but enough. "Owen," I said, "the pen." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the precursor to one. "About 6 weeks ago," he said, "I saw the early draft of the contract on Claudia's screen. There was a clause specifying that the signature block had to be completed with a particular instrument. The language was unusually specific." He paused. "So I looked into it. The pen Fletcher was carrying uses thermochromic ink, heat sensitive. The signature appears normally when applied, but at body temperature approximately 40 degrees. Celsius, the ink becomes transparent within 24 to 48 hours. No signature, no authentication, no enforceable document. The clause wasn't about formality," I said. "It was a mechanism to ensure the signature disappeared." "Right. The trust would be filed immediately while the signature was still visible. By the time any challenge was raised, the original signature would be gone, leaving a filed document that was permanently contestable. In the resulting legal dispute, Claudia, as named trustee, would have had de facto control of the assets for years. Years during which she administers $38 million, I said. "Yes." I exhaled. The elegance of it was unpleasant to acknowledge. "So you swapped the pen?" I said. "I swapped the pen. Servers at the Pierre are required to carry one for signing checks. Standard ballpoint, permanent, authenticated. I made the swap during the medical emergency. When everyone was focused on you, Fletcher stepped back from the table. His jacket was on the chair beside the briefcase. 2 seconds. I looked at this 22-year-old man in his gray sweatshirt who had researched thermochromic ink 6 weeks before an engagement party and executed a pen swap in the middle of a staged medical emergency. "Owen," I said, "I owe you considerably more than gratitude." He shook his head. "You helped my brother 3 years ago. You didn't have to. You did it because it was right." He met my eyes steadily. "We're even." We were not even, but I did not say so. Dr. Patricia Hale stepped in, tablet in hand. She reviewed my blood work, checked my blood pressure, and looked at me over the tablet with the measured honesty of a physician who values precision over comfort. "I'm clearing you for discharge," she said. "Your reaction last night was real, but managed significantly by the antihistamine taken prior to exposure. I'm noting it as a managed anaphylactic episode. The record will reflect what the blood work reflects." She said nothing further. She was a careful physician. "And thank you, Dr. Hale," I said, "for everything." I reached over and touched Preston's arm. He woke immediately, snapping upright with the alertness of a man sleeping on the edge of emergency. He looked at me, then Owen, then the window. "The warrants," he said. "Morse said by morning, je suis insécure, es parti que bisaum," I said. He nodded. His eyes were clearer than they had been at any point in the previous 10 hours. "Dad." His voice was rough from sleep and from everything the night had cost it. "When this is over, I want to talk to you. Really talk. About us. About the last 10 years. Not now," I said gently. "There will be time. I give you my word." He nodded once, and the nod carried something a handshake could not, the weight of a promise between two people who both understand that it is real. Owen looked up from his phone. "Derek says the FBI forensic team confirmed the ink on Fletcher's pen. They got a warrant for his briefcase an hour ago." "Thermochromic," I said. "Thermochromic," he confirmed. And somewhere in Manhattan, Claudia Reeves did not yet know that it was the last ordinary morning she was going to have for a very long time. The morning air outside New York Presbyterian hit me like cold water. October in Manhattan carries a particular quality of light in the early hours, flat and silver, the kind that makes the city look like a photograph of itself, rather than the thing itself, all angles and reflections without warmth. I stood on the sidewalk outside the hospital entrance for a moment, Preston beside me and Owen a half step behind, and simply breathed. 3 hours of sleep in a hospital bed. A staged allergic reaction, 2 FBI agents, a recorded confession, a pen full of disappearing ink, and a son who had cried himself empty and come out the other side of it, still standing. Not a bad night's work. The car I had arranged was waiting a black sedan. My regular driver, a man named Arthur, who had worked for me for 11 years, and who understood that certain mornings required silence and a thermos of black coffee and nothing else. He had both. I accepted the coffee through the window without getting in. Preston stood on the sidewalk with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the street with the slightly unfocused gaze of a man whose mind is still processing at a pace the rest of him cannot keep up with. "What happens now?" he said. "Not now," I said. "We wait for Morse." My phone buzzed. Derek. Asset freeze confirmed active as of Thursday, October 16th, 2024, 4:47 p.m. Morse obtained an emergency ex parte order, a court order issued by a federal magistrate judge without prior notice to the other side, granted on evidence of immediate risk of asset dissipation under 18 U.S. C. 1345. The magistrate signed it in under 2 hours. Executed through FBI Financial Crimes Unit. All accounts associated with Whitfield Capital Holdings, Whitfield Family Trust, pending entity and Conrad J. Whitfield personally total frozen value $47.2 million. Any attempt to file a trust instrument naming those assets would have triggered immediate federal review. The contract, even if signed and filed, would have hit a wall within 24 hours. They were trying to take money that was already federally protected. Claudia's lawyers are going to have a very bad morning. I read it twice. Then I held the phone toward Preston. He read it. I watched his eyes move across the screen, once quickly, then again, slowly. The way eyes move when the brain is refusing to process something at normal speed, because the information is too large to absorb in a single pass. 3 days ago, he said. His voice was very quiet. 3 days ago, I confirmed. He lowered the phone. He looked at me, really looked the way he had not looked at me in the hospital, when things were moving too fast for anything as slow as genuine attention. He looked at me the way he had when he was 9 years old, and had watched me negotiate a difficult situation, and had not fully understood what he was watching, but had understood that it required something he did not yet have a name for. "You already knew," he said, "before the party. You already knew enough to freeze the assets." "I suspected enough," I said. Derek had found preliminary connections between Claudia and Marsh Capital Holdings through public SEC filings 3 weeks ago. Nothing prosecutable, nothing that constituted proof, but enough to justify a protective measure. I wrapped both hands around the thermos. I contacted Agent Morse for the first time 4 days ago. She reviewed what Derek had found and agreed that the threshold for a DOJ injunction had been met. The freeze was executed Thursday afternoon. Preston was quiet for a long moment. Owen, standing slightly behind and to Preston's right, had read the message over Preston's shoulder. His expression was, there is no more precise word for it, luminous. The uncomplicated, open-faced relief of a 22-year-old who had spent the night on the edge of catastrophe and has just been handed confirmation that the ground was solid the entire time. "So the whole evening," Owen said slowly. "The party, the contract, the pen, all of it, they were executing a plan that was already dead. The assets were protected before they walked into the Pierre," I said. "But protection without evidence is only half a solution. I needed them to commit fully to the act. I needed the contract on the table. Fletcher's false credentials presented in front of witnesses, the pen in my hand, the Marsh call, all of it on record. Because frozen assets can be unfrozen by a clever lawyer if there is no corresponding criminal case. I looked at Preston. Claudia Reeves is a very clever lawyer. I needed to ensure that the criminal case was airtight before she had any opportunity to challenge the freeze. Preston pressed his fist against his mouth. His jaw was tight, his eyes working through something I could not entirely read, an emotion that was still finding its shape. "You attended your own son's engagement party," he said carefully, knowing the woman he loved was trying to defraud you, knowing the whole evening was a trap. "And you sat there and ate dinner and made conversation and—" His voice broke slightly on the last word, not from grief this time, but from something that was either admiration or devastation, or some precise compound of the two. "Dad, I did not know how you were involved," I said. "Not the full extent. I did not know about the Marsh debt until page 11. I did not know the degree to which Claudia had structured your situation to make you a necessary participant." I paused. "Had I known the full picture 3 weeks ago, I would have come to you directly. I want you to understand that." He looked at me, his jaw unclenched degree by degree. "I know," he said. My phone rang. Agent Morse. "Mr. Whitfield." Her voice was crisp, fully operational, the voice of someone who had not slept and did not intend to acknowledge it. "Warrants executed. We have teams at 3 locations: Claudia Reeves's apartment on the Upper West Side, Fletcher Dunn's hotel room in Midtown, and the registered address for Marsh Capital Holdings in Brooklyn. We also have a locate and detain on Gerald Marsh. I'm at the Pierre now. I need you here within the hour." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said. "Good. One more thing." A brief pause, the pause of someone deciding whether to say something that falls slightly outside the purely operational. "The asset freeze documentation your colleague compiled was extremely thorough. When this goes to trial, it will matter considerably." "And Derek Stone," I said, "he did the work. His name will be in my report," she said. "See you at the Pierre." She ended the call. I looked at Preston, then at Owen. "We need to go back," I said. Owen straightened immediately, the professional composure slipping back into place over the exhaustion beneath it, like a jacket put on for a particular occasion. Preston adjusted his collar, ran a hand through his hair, and looked at the facade of the hospital. For a moment, the brick and glass of a building that had contained the worst and the most clarifying night of his adult life. "One question," Preston said. He turned to me, and his voice was entirely steady, stripped of everything except the essential. "When we get there, when Claudia is arrested, am I going to have to watch that?" I considered the question honestly. "Probably," I said. He nodded, swallowed. "Okay." Another nod, slower, as though confirming something to himself rather than to me. "Okay, I can do that." I put my hand briefly on his shoulder. Not the back of the neck this time, not the childhood gesture of comfort, but the hand on the shoulder of one adult to another, acknowledging capability rather than offering protection. "I know you can," I said. We got in the car. Arthur pulled out into the morning traffic without a word, the thermos wedged between the front seats, the city moving past the windows in its relentless, indifferent way. Owen sat beside me in the back, his hands folded in his lap. Preston sat on the other side, looking out his window. My phone buzzed one more time. Derek again. "Detective Roy Chambers, NYPD Financial Crimes Liaison, will be on site at the Pierre, coordinating with Morse's team. He knows who you are. He'll find you." I sent back a single word, "Understood." And then I finished the last of the coffee, set the thermos on the seat between us, and watched Manhattan slide past the windows in the thin October light. The buildings and the people and the traffic and the specific relentless forward motion of a city that does not pause for the private reckonings of any individual life, no matter how large those reckonings feel from the inside. We crossed 61st Street. The Pierre's canopy was visible ahead, the same gold lettering, the same doorman in the same coat, the morning shift beginning, with no knowledge of what the previous 12 hours had contained within those walls. I straightened in the seat. 35 years of building something, one night to protect it, and now the last act. The ballroom looked different in the morning. Without the chandelier light and the 200 guests and the architectural intention of an evening designed to impress the 30th floor space, was simply a large room with tall windows and the particular emptiness of a place that had contained a great deal of human performance and been left with its residue. The ivory linen was still on the tables, slightly disordered now, glasses not fully cleared, a napkin on the floor near the east wall that no one had retrieved. The gardenias in the crystal vases had begun to lose their edges, petals softening at the tips, the heavy scent thinning in the cooler morning air. Thomas Greer met us at the elevator, his professional composure operating at full capacity, despite the fact that his hotel had been the site of a federal fraud attempt and was now hosting 3 FBI agents, 2 NYPD officers, and a forensic documentation team at 9:30 in the morning. He was the kind of man who managed crises by treating them as logistical problems, and I respected that considerably. "Mr. Whitfield," he said, "I've secured the ballroom for Agent Morse's use. Building security is cooperating fully. Is there anything else you need from us?" "Nothing," I said. "Thank you, Thomas." He nodded and withdrew with the quiet efficiency that distinguished genuinely good professionals from merely competent ones. Detective Roy Chambers was standing near the east wall, where Fletcher had stood, with his briefcase the previous evening. He was 50 years old, broad-shouldered, with the particular stillness of a man who has attended a great many scenes in a career and knows that the scene will tell you more if you give it time than if you impose yourself upon it. He introduced himself with a handshake that was brief and entirely without theater. "Mr. Whitfield, Roy Chambers, NYPD Financial Crimes. I've been briefed by Agent Morse. We have 2 officers at the service exits and 1 on the parking structure." He looked at Owen. "Mr. Tate, Agent Morse said you'd be here. You'll want to stay toward the back of the room when the subject arrives." Owen nodded. He had found a position near the window, slightly behind, and to the left of where I was standing, present but not prominent, the particular position of someone who understands his role in what is about to happen and is comfortable with it. Agent Strickland had set up a portable document station at the center table, the same table where the contract had been placed the previous evening. The contract itself was there, inside a clear evidence sleeve alongside Derek's 3 reports. The printed PACER records Owen had brought to the hospital, and a laptop displaying the frozen asset documentation. Morse stood at the head of the table. She looked if anything sharper than she had at 2 a.m., the quality of alertness that some people achieve not by sleeping, but by moving through exhaustion into a second operational register that is cleaner and faster than ordinary wakefulness. Preston was standing 3 steps behind me. He had not spoken since we entered the building. His arms were crossed not defensively, but as though he needed something to hold on to. That was part of himself, and his eyes were moving around the room with the expression of a man returning to a place where something significant happened, and finding that the place itself has not changed at all, which is its own particular form of disorientation. The elevator doors opened at 9:47 a.m. Claudia Reeves walked into the ballroom. She was dressed as though for a professional meeting, dark blazer-tailored trousers, her hair immaculate, her bearing composed. She had slept, or at least had the presentation of someone who had slept, and she crossed the room toward Agent Morse with the controlled ease of a woman who has navigated difficult rooms before and intends to navigate this one. Then she saw me. Something happened in her face. A recalibration so rapid it was almost invisible, but I caught it, the quarter-second adjustment of a person who had calculated that I would not be here, that I would still be in a hospital bed, that she would be managing federal agents without the complication of the man whose assets she had attempted to take. She recovered instantly. Her expression settled into a look of what appeared to be genuine concern. "Conrad," she said, "I'm so relieved you're well. Last night was frightening. I've been terribly worried." "And I'm certain you have been," I said. She turned to Morse. "Agent Morse, I want to be as helpful as possible. I understand there are some questions about last night. I'm happy to address anything." "Thank you, Ms. Reeves," Morse said. "Please sit down." Claudia sat at the center table. She placed her hands flat on the surface, the same composed professional posture she had used the previous evening when presenting the trust proposal. Old habits, strong habits, the habits of a decade of careful construction. Strickland opened the evidence sleeve and slid the contract across the table toward her. "Do you recognize this document?" Morse asked. Claudia looked at it. "Yes, it's the family trust proposal I mentioned to Conrad last night. Nothing has been executed. It's a preliminary document." "Prepared by Fletcher Dunn," Morse said. "That's correct. Fletcher Dunn, who was convicted in 2019 in the Southern District of Florida of wire fraud, an unauthorized practice of law." Morse set a printed copy of the PACER record beside the contract. "Who has never held a bar license in any U.S. jurisdiction, who served 14 months at FCY Miami and was on federal supervised release until March 2025. A single beat of silence. Claudia's hands remained flat on the table. "I was not aware of that history," she said. "You were not aware," Morse said without inflection. "Despite the fact that you directed him to prepare a legal document, introduced him to your fiancé's family as a licensed estate attorney, and according to a recording made in this room last night, instructed him specifically about which pen to use during the execution of that document. Morse looked at her steadily. Would you like to hear the recording, Ms. Reeves? Or shall I describe its contents? The room was very quiet. Claudia's jaw moved barely, almost imperceptibly. The first crack in the architecture. I'd like to speak with my attorney, she said. You're not under arrest, Morse said. You're free to leave at any time. Claudia stayed. I understood the calculation. She needed to know the full scope of what we had before her attorney arrived and told her to say nothing. That was the reasoning of a person who still believed she could manage the outcome if she understood the information first. You're also free to continue speaking voluntarily, which I'd encourage because the next 10 minutes are going to establish the full evidentiary picture, whether you participate or not. A silence. Then Claudia stayed where she was, and in that staying she made the choice that every experienced investigator waits for the choice of a person who believes they can still manage the situation if they understand the full scope of what is arrayed against them. Morse nodded to Strickland. He began. He laid it out the way forensic accountants lay things out, chronologically, precisely, without editorial, each element connected to the next, with the quiet inevitability of a mathematical proof. Claudia's law degree, the establishment of Reeves Digital Consulting, the 14 months of unauthorized access to rival law firms' systems, each incident documented through server logs that Owen's recollection had helped investigators locate, the first contact with Preston Whitfield introduced through a mutual acquaintance who, had Derek's research revealed, been on Marsh's payroll, the 18 months of Preston's escalating debt, the introduction of Fletcher Dunn, the drafting of the Whitfield Family Trust, the thermochromic pen, the engagement party. And then Strickland opened the laptop and turned it to face Claudia. On the screen was a single document, a public record search result. At the top, Bernard Reeves, Securities Industry Bar, permanent effective 2009. Your father, Morse said, not accusingly, simply. Something happened to Claudia's face that I do not think she intended to happen. Not the controlled recalibration of the past 20 minutes, something else. Something that moved beneath the professional surface and arrived in her eyes before she could redirect it. It was grief. Raw, unperformed, entirely genuine grief. The grief of an 18-year-old girl watching her father's career and watching the man she loved most in the world, reduced to a name on a regulatory document, watching him disappear by degrees over the 3 years before his heart simply quit. It lasted 4 seconds. Then it was gone, locked back down behind the composure she had spent 15 years constructing. But I had seen it. And I understood for the first time with full clarity that what I was looking at across the table was not simply a criminal. It was a daughter. A daughter who had loved her father, lost him, and decided that the man responsible had to pay a price equivalent to what she had lost. She had not been wrong that she had lost something devastating. She had been wrong about everything else. From behind me, Preston's voice came low, almost inaudible, directed not at Claudia, but at the space between them. Claudia? She looked at him. And in that look, the first time their eyes had met, since he had learned who she really was, I saw something pass between them that I could not name and did not try to. It was too private and too damaged and too entirely theirs. Her eyes went bright. Her throat moved. Preston, she said. Her voice for the first time all morning was not composed. It was the voice of a 32-year-old woman who had built a decade-long architecture of revenge and was only now in this moment understanding the full weight of what it had cost to build it. Preston's jaw was tight. His eyes were wet. His voice, when it came, was quiet and entirely without anger, which was, I think, the most devastating thing it could have been. Did you ever love me? He said. Any part of it. At any point. Did you? The silence that followed was the longest in the room. And then, Claudia Bernard Reeves, attorney at law architect of a 15-year plan, daughter of a man who had died broken and barred from his profession, looked at the man she had used as a mechanism and said nothing. But her eyes answered him. And from the expression on Preston's face, I understood that the answer, whatever it was the most complicated truth of the entire night. Morse stood. Ms. Reeves, she said, I'm placing you under arrest. Morse read the Miranda warning in a voice that was even and unhurried, the cadence of someone who has read these words so many times that they have become a kind of professional liturgy, meaningful not because they are new, but because they are exact. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. Claudia stood and listened with her hands at her sides, her posture still impeccable, her chin level. She had been handcuffed with her hands in front rather than behind a small procedural accommodation, that Morse extended without comment and which Claudia received without acknowledgement. Her blazer was still buttoned. Her hair was still immaculate. Only her eyes had changed. They were not frightened. They were not defiant. They carried the particular expression of someone who has arrived at the end of a very long road and is only now standing at its terminus, understanding what the road actually cost. "Do you understand these rights as I have read them to you?" Morse asked. "Yes," Claudia said. Her voice was steady. I had expected nothing less. Morse's radio clicked. Strickland across the room pressed his earpiece and listened for a moment. Then he looked at Morse and gave a single nod. "Fletcher Dunn is in custody," Strickland said. "Apprehended at the Marriott Marquis, Times Square, room 1407. He was in the process of packing when agents arrived." A pause. The briefcase was open on the bed. 3 additional blank contract sets inside, all with the same thermochromic pen. 3 additional sets. 3 other families Claudia and Fletcher had planned to approach after this one. The scale of it settled in the room, with a weight that had nothing theatrical about it. Detective Chambers' radio produced a burst of static, followed by a voice. He stepped away to take it, spoke briefly and returned. "Gerald Marsh was located at a property in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn," he said. "Cooperative when agents arrived, which means his lawyer was already there." A slight dryness in his tone. "He's being transported to Federal Plaza for questioning. My understanding is that the recording from last night puts him squarely inside the conspiracy." "It does," Morse confirmed. She turned to the second agent who had accompanied her, a younger woman named Agent Calloway, who had been standing near the elevator, quietly managing the logistics of the operation, and gave a brief nod. The agent moved to Claudia's side. This was the moment, the walking out. I had thought about what I would feel watching this. I had in the past 12 hours felt fury and grief, and the cold precision of a man executing a plan under extreme pressure. I had expected that watching Claudia Reeves escorted from the ballroom of the Pierre Hotel would produce something that resembled satisfaction. It did not. What I felt standing beside the center table where the contract had been presented the previous evening, watching a 32-year-old woman walk toward the elevator in handcuffs with an FBI agent at her elbow, was something considerably heavier and considerably less clean. The grief of it. The waste. 15 years of a brilliant mind directed entirely toward destruction, the destruction of something I had built, yes, but also the destruction of whatever Claudia Bernard Reeves might have become if her father's ending had not become the organizing principle of her life. She walked past Preston. They were less than 4 feet apart. Claudia's pace did not slow. She was looking straight ahead at the elevator, at the specific fixed point in the middle distance that people look at when they are concentrating on remaining composed under conditions designed to make composure impossible. But as she passed him, her head turned. Just slightly, just enough. She looked at Preston for 1 second, one single, undefended second, and in that second, I saw something in her face that I believe she had not intended anyone to see. Not guilt exactly, not apology. Something that existed in the narrow, difficult territory between those two things. The expression of a person who has done something they cannot undo and knows it with the full weight of knowing. Preston looked back at her. His jaw was tight. His eyes were wet but dry, the particular state of eyes that have used up every tear they had available and are now simply exposed, stripped of the social protection that tears provide. He did not speak. He did not move. He simply looked at her with all of the previous night's devastation and all of the previous 10 years of genuine feeling and let her see all of it without editing any of it. She looked away first. The elevator doors opened. Agent Calloway guided her inside. The doors closed. And Claudia Reeves disappeared from the ballroom of the Pierre Hotel, the same room she had spent months planning to use as the stage for the final act of 15 years of architectural revenge. The room exhaled. Sophie Lane, the young copper-haired server who had been called in for the morning setup and had witnessed the past 30 minutes from the service corridor with wide, horrified eyes, pressed her back against the doorframe and let out a breath that was almost a sob. She pressed one hand over her mouth, looked at me, and then looked away quickly as though eye contact itself was too much. Thomas Greer appeared from the corridor. He was managing his composure with the professional discipline of a man who needs his composure to function. But the lines around his eyes were deeper than they had been 12 hours ago, and his hands, which were clasped in front of him, were clasped with slightly more force than was entirely natural. "Mr. Whitfield," he said, "is there anything the hotel can do for you or your son?" "A quiet room," I said, "and coffee if you have it." "Of course," he said. He disappeared immediately, and I was grateful for him. Strickland approached Preston. He stood in front of my son with the measured, respectful gravity of a man who has delivered difficult news before and understands that the delivery matters as much as the content. "Mr. Whitfield," he said, "Preston, I want to explain where things stand for you specifically." He produced a single folded document from his jacket. "The United States Attorney's Office is prepared to offer you a cooperation agreement. In exchange for your complete and truthful testimony regarding Claudia Reeves, Fletcher Dunn, and Gerald Marsh, and your cooperation with any subsequent proceedings, the government will not seek criminal charges against you for your role in the trust proceedings." He paused. "Your withdrawal of family funds, the $8.7 million to Marsh, will be treated as a civil matter between you and your father. No federal charges." Preston stared at the document. "The funds," he said. His voice was rough. "The 8.7, can any of it be recovered?" Strickland glanced at me. I gave a small nod. "The Marsh assets are being frozen as part of the arrest proceedings," Strickland said. "Recovery is not guaranteed, but it is possible. These cases can take time." He held the document out. "You'll want to review this with your own attorney before signing. That's standard. We'll give you whatever time you need." Preston took the document. He held it in both hands looking at it, and something in the way he held it carefully, with the attentiveness of someone handling something that is simultaneously a burden and a lifeline, told me that he understood precisely what it was. "Thank you," he said. His voice came out stronger than I expected. Strickland nodded and withdrew to give Preston space. Owen had been standing near the window throughout the same window where he had stood the previous evening, as a server, watching the party unfold, with the focused attention of a young man running two operations simultaneously. He crossed the room now to stand beside Preston, and he did not say anything, but he stood close enough that his presence was clear. Preston looked at him sideways. "Did you know when you came to the party? Did you know all of it?" "Not all of it," Owen said honestly. "I knew about Fletcher. I knew about the pen. I knew Claudia was not what she said she was." He paused. "I didn't know about your father's history with her father. I didn't know how deep it went." Preston nodded slowly. "Neither did I." Another nod. "Neither did I." Thomas Greer returned with coffee, a tray 3 cups, proper cups, not paper. The hotel's morning blend in a silver carafe. He set it on the center table without a word and withdrew. The small human gesture of it coffee proper cups in the middle of a federal investigation was so entirely right that I felt something loosen in my chest that I had not realized was still clenched. I poured 3 cups, handed one to Preston, one to Owen. We stood in the empty ballroom of the Pierre Hotel at 12 minutes past noon on a Saturday in October, drinking coffee next to an FBI evidence table in a room that still smelled faintly of gardenias that were beginning to die. "What happens now?" Owen asked. His voice was quiet, not anxious, the question of someone who has completed one chapter and is simply curious about the next. I looked at the window, at the park visible below, at the city doing its relentless, indifferent thing in the silver October light. "Now," I said, "we go home." The Greenwich house looked exactly as I had left it. That was always the thing about returning home after something significant the house did not know. The 6-bedroom colonial on Havemeyer Road sat in its 2 acres of Connecticut autumn with the same composed indifference it had always maintained the maple trees along the drive, burning red and orange in the afternoon light. The south fence just barely visible through the side yard where Margaret's gardenias had gone dormant for the winter. The gravel of the drive crunched under the car's tires in the same way it had crunched for 37 years. The front door had the same slight resistance it always had, the wood having swelled incrementally with each passing decade, until it required a specific angle of push to open cleanly. I knew the angle. Owen carried his own bag to the guest room at the top of the stairs without being asked, pausing only long enough to put his hand briefly on Preston's shoulder, a gesture that said everything it needed to say and nothing more before disappearing down the hall. The door closed quietly behind him. Preston and I stood in the entrance hall. The house was warm. Mrs. Alcott, who came 3 times a week and had worked for me for 9 years, had been in on Friday and left the heat running and a covered dish in the refrigerator with a handwritten note on top that read simply in her large clear script, "Welcome home, Mr. W. Heat at 350 for 30 minutes. I looked at the note for a moment longer than it required. Margaret would have left a note like that. "Kitchen," I said to Preston. "You need to eat something. So do I." He followed me without argument. The kitchen was large and south-facing, full of the thin October afternoon light, and I moved through it with the specific muscle memory of a man who has prepared food in a particular space for decades, where the plates were where the oven knobs were, which burner ran hot. Preston sat at the kitchen table. He had taken off his jacket somewhere between the car and the house, and he was sitting in his rumpled engagement party shirt with his elbows on the table and his eyes following me around the kitchen with the particular unfocused attention of a man who is too tired to look at anything specific, and so looks at the nearest moving thing. I put Mrs. Alcott's dish in the oven, made coffee, sat down across from my son. For a long moment we did not speak. The refrigerator hummed. The oven ticked as it warmed. Outside, a car moved slowly along Havemeyer Road, its sound fading until the house was quiet again. "I want to start," Preston said. His voice was rough, scraped down to something essential by 36 hours of everything the night had demanded of it. "I want to go first, because if I don't go first, I'm going to talk myself out of it." "All right," I said. He pressed both hands flat on the table, the same gesture his mother had used when she was preparing to say something she had thought carefully about and intended to say exactly right. "I have been gambling since I was 26 years old," he said. "Not casually, not the way people go to Vegas for a weekend, compulsively, badly. The kind that starts as a way to feel something and ends as a way to feel nothing, which is the same thing eventually." He looked at his hands. "I hid it from you because I was ashamed. And because I was afraid of what you would think of me. And because somewhere in the last 10 years, I had decided that the only version of myself you were capable of approving of was a version that had things together, and I didn't have things together. And so, I just stopped showing you the version that didn't." He looked up. "I think I stopped being honest with you a long time before Claudia," he said. "And I think part of why she worked, part of why she got so far into my life before I saw anything, was that I was already practiced at not telling the truth to the person who mattered most. Because I'd been doing it with you for years." My throat tightened. I held his gaze. "That's on me," I said. "Not the gambling that is yours to own, and I know you know that, but the version of me that you felt you had to hide from." I paused, choosing words with care. "I was not always present, Preston. I was in the house. I was at the table. I was at the recitals and the graduations and the dinners, but I was not always there." I stopped. "Your mother told me that once. She said it gently, and she said it once, and she never said it again because that was how she did things. But she was right. There was a version of your father that you only got the surface of, and I think a child who only gets the surface of his father learns to offer only the surface in return." Preston's jaw worked. His eyes had gone wet again, not the desperate flooded quality of the hospital tears, but the quiet, steady wet of a man feeling something true. "Mom would have fixed this," he said. His voice broke slightly on the last word. "She would have gotten us both in the same room before it got this far, and she would have made us talk until we ran out of road." "She would have," I agreed. My chest ached with the simple honesty of it. She had a gift for that, for identifying the distance between two people and refusing to accept it as permanent. "I miss her," Preston said, raw, unelaborated, the 3 words of it. "Every day," I said. "Every single day." The oven timer clicked. I got up and took out Mrs. Alcott's dish, a roast chicken simple and warm and exactly right, and put it on the table between us with 2 plates and 2 forks, and did not bother with any of the ceremony of a proper meal. We were both too far past ceremony for that. Preston served himself. I served myself. We ate in silence for a while, and it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of 2 people who have said something real and are giving it room to settle. After a while, Preston said, "The cooperation agreement." "Yes." Strickland said recovery of the funds wasn't guaranteed. He looked at his plate. $8.7 million. "Dad, I know what that is. I know what it costs." "The accounts were frozen," I said. "Nothing was transferred. The principal is intact. The 8.7 is a liability you carry until the civil proceeding settles it, and we will address that through proper channels with proper legal advice. It is manageable." I looked at him. "It is also not the point." He looked up. "The point," Dalby said, "is that you were sitting in this kitchen, not because of the money or the legal situation or anything that happened last night. Because you are my son, and this is your home, and there is not a version of any of this in which that changes." Preston pressed his lips together. His chin moved the particular movement of someone fighting something that wants very badly to come out. It came out. Not loudly, not dramatically. He bent his head and pressed his fist against his mouth and cried with the full, unguarded, entirely unself-conscious quality of a man who has finally arrived somewhere safe enough to do so. His shoulders shook, his breath came ragged and uneven. And I sat across the table and let him, because sometimes the most present a parent can be is simply to remain in the room and not move. When it subsided, he lifted his head. His face was wrecked and open and entirely his own. I'm going to get help, he said. His voice was steady, which surprised me. For the gambling, real help, not willpower and good intentions, actual treatment. I looked it up once 2 years ago, and then I closed the tab and pretended I hadn't. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. I'm not going to close the tab again. I'll go with you, I said, to the first appointment if you want company, or I'll stay here if you prefer to go alone, whichever is useful. He looked at me, and the look on his face, the specific raw, uncomplicated gratitude of a 34-year-old man who has just been offered the thing he needed without conditions, was the thing I will remember longest from a night that contained a great many things worth remembering. I'd like the company, he said. Then you'll have it. Outside, the afternoon was thinning toward early evening, the light going the color of the maple trees, amber and low and fading. The coffee had gone cold. The chicken was mostly gone. The kitchen held the specific warmth of a room that has been lived in by people who mattered to each other for a long time, imperfectly, with continuity. I reached across the table and put my hand over my son's. He turned his hand over and gripped mine. We sat like that for a while, in the house that Margaret had filled with gardenias every summer in the kitchen, where Preston had asked me questions about money he was too young to understand, in the quiet of a Connecticut afternoon that had no knowledge of everything it had taken to arrive here. At some point, Owen appeared in the kitchen doorway. He had changed into clean clothes and looked considerably less like a man who had been awake for 36 hours, which made one of us. He looked at the table at the chicken, the cold coffee, the two of us sitting with our hands stacked in the center of the table, like something architectural, and he absorbed the scene with the quiet intelligence that I had come to understand was simply the way Owen Tate processed the world. "Is there more chicken?" he said. Preston laughed. It was a real laugh, sudden, entirely unguarded, the kind of laugh that arrives when the body has been through enough gravity that it seizes on the first available lightness with pure reflexive relief. It lasted only a few seconds, and it was slightly wet at the edges, but it was entirely genuine, and the sound of it in that kitchen, in that house on that October afternoon, was the finest thing I had heard in a very long time. There is, I said. Sit down, Owen. He sat. I served him. And the three of us ate together in the fading afternoon light in the Greenwich house at the end of the longest night any of us had ever had. I woke before dawn. Old habit. 35 years of early markets, early calls, early everything. My body did not know how to sleep past 5, regardless of what the previous day had cost it. I lay in the dark of the master bedroom for a few minutes, listening to the house breathe around me, then got up, put on the same clothes I had worn the day before, because I lacked the energy to make a different decision, and went downstairs to make coffee. Preston was already in the kitchen. He was sitting at the table with his phone in both hands, reading something with the concentrated attention of a man who has been awake for a while and has moved past exhaustion into the functional clarity that sometimes follows it. He looked up when I came in. "Lawyer," he said, holding up the phone. "I found 3 with federal cooperation experience. I've got a call at 9 with the first one." "Yeah, good," I said. I made coffee, sat down. We did not need to fill the silence with anything. At 7:14 a.m., my phone rang. Morse. "Charges filed this morning," she said without preamble. "Claudia Reeves wire fraud conspiracy, RICO conspiracy, unauthorized practice of law, and 1 count of attempted financial elder abuse under New York state law. Fletcher Dunn, wire fraud, document fraud. Violation of federal supervised release. Gerald Marsh extortionate credit transactions under 18 U.S.C. 892 conspiracy." A brief pause. "It's a solid package, Mr. Whitfield. The recording alone is going to be very difficult for her defense to address." "And Owen Tate," I said. "Formal cooperation agreement executed this morning. No charges recommended. His testimony is documented and protected." Another pause shorter. "He did the right thing, under difficult circumstances and at personal cost. That matters to us." "It matters to me as well," I said. I ended the call and told Preston. He listened, nodded, and pressed his lips together briefly, the compressed, wordless acknowledgement of a man absorbing good news that arrives inside a larger context still being processed. Owen came downstairs at 8 hair unruly, wearing the same gray sweatshirt, carrying the particular expression of someone who has slept deeply for the first time in a long time, and is slightly surprised by how it feels. He accepted coffee without speaking, which I appreciated. After a while, he said, "Derek sent something." He turned his phone toward me. A message from Derek Stone sent at 6:30 a.m. "Conrad preliminary asset recovery analysis complete. Of the $8.7 million transferred to Marsh Capital Holdings through various shell accounts, approximately $5.1 million has been located in frozen accounts. Recovery proceedings will take 12 to 18 months through civil forfeiture. The remaining $3.6 million is being traced. No guarantees, but it looks better than it did yesterday. Get some sleep. I read it twice. Then I set the phone down and looked at the window. Outside the south garden was gray and still in the early morning. Margaret's gardenia beds along the fence were bare for winter, just dark soil, and the trim-back stems of what would bloom again in spring if the season was kind. I had not tended them myself in years. I had paid someone to tend them, which was not the same thing, and I had told myself it did not matter, which was also not the same thing. I thought about Bernard Reeves, about a daughter who had loved her father so completely that his loss had become the blueprint for her life. I thought about the difference between grief and obsession and how narrow that passage is, and how easily a person moves through it without noticing the direction of travel. I thought about Preston at the table behind me, calling lawyers doing the next right thing. I thought about Margaret, who would have known what to say about all of it, and would have said it once and meant it completely. I picked up my coffee cup. "Preston," I said, without turning from the window. "After your call this morning, would you want to stay a few days?" A pause. "Yeah," he said. His voice was quiet and entirely certain. "I would." I nodded. The garden sat in its October stillness. The coffee was warm. The house held the three of us without difficulty the way houses do, when they have been built for more than one person, and remember it. April arrives differently in Greenwich than it does in Manhattan. In the city, spring is something you infer a degree of warmth in the air between buildings, a shift in the quality of light on glass and steel, the appearance of flowers in the buckets outside corner markets that you buy, because the season demands it rather than because you have anywhere particular to put them. In Greenwich, spring is something you see. It comes through the window of the kitchen on Havemeyer Road, as color returning to the south garden, slow and specific and entirely its own. Margaret's gardenias were blooming. I stood at the kitchen window with my morning coffee and looked at them white and heavy against the dark soil of the south fence, exactly as they had been every April for 30 years, and felt the particular quality of a grief that has learned over time to coexist with gratitude. They were beautiful. They had always been beautiful. That had not changed. A great deal else had. The federal trial of Claudia Bernard Reeves was scheduled for September 2025. Her attorney had filed 3 preliminary motions in the intervening months, each dismissed. The recording from the ballroom, authenticated by the FBI's technical division, was the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. 23 minutes of Claudia's own voice, precise and damning, and entirely unambiguous. Her attorney had described it in one filing as prejudicial. The judge had described it in his ruling as evidence. Fletcher Dunn had accepted a plea agreement in January. 8 years federal facility, no parole eligibility for the first 5. His supervised release from the 2019 conviction had been revoked, simultaneously adding 14 months to the sentence. He had not appeared surprised when the sentence was read. Gerald Marsh had been indicted on 4 counts of extortionate credit transactions and 2 counts of federal conspiracy. His lawyers were fighting it. They would fight it for a long time. That was what expensive lawyers did. But the recorded call, Preston's voice shaking Marsh's voice entirely calm, was also evidence, and evidence in my experience tends to outlast the arguments made against it. Of the $8.7 million Preston had paid to Marsh, $5.1 had been recovered through civil forfeiture proceedings and returned to the family accounts. The remaining $3.6 was still being traced through shell company structures that Marsh's attorneys were contesting at every level. Derek estimated another 18 months before that process concluded. Preston had signed the cooperation agreement in October, 4 days after the arrests. He had retained a federal defense attorney named Caroline Voss. Sharp, experienced, and entirely unimpressed by the complexity of the situation, which was exactly what he needed. He had also 2 weeks after the engagement party walked into the offices of a gambling addiction treatment center in Stamford and sat down in a chair and told the truth about the past 8 years. He went every Thursday. He had not missed a session. He called me on Sundays. Every Sunday without fail, which was something that had not happened in the previous 10 years, and which I found each week to be the finest part of that day. Owen Tate had been offered a position at Whitfield Advisory Group, the consultancy I had established in Greenwich in January, smaller and more selective than Whitfield Capital, had been built on the premise that fewer clients served better was worth more than more clients served adequately. His title was Director of Digital Security. He had accepted without negotiating the salary, which told me something about him and I had revised the offer upward without being asked, which I hoped told him something about me. Derek Stone had declined a formal role but had accepted a consulting arrangement and a standing invitation to dinner, both of which he used regularly. I set my coffee cup on the windowsill and looked at the gardenias for a long moment. Beautiful things require patience. Margaret had said that every summer, kneeling in the south garden with her hands in the dark soil, and I had heard it and agreed and moved on to the next thing, the way I had moved on from a great many things that deserved more than passing agreement. I was done moving on. The phone on the counter showed a message from Preston sent at 7 this morning. The Stamford appointment went well. Staying for dinner if that works. Bringing Owen. I typed back, "It works. I'll tell Mrs. Alcott." I put the phone in my pocket and went out to the garden. The April air was cool and carried the particular sweetness of things returning, the gardenias, the wet earth, the maple trees along the drive beginning to leaf. I stood at the south fence and looked at what Margaret had planted and tended and loved for 30 years, and what I had paid someone else to tend for the years since, and what I intended this spring to tend myself. It would take time, most things worth having done. I was not in a hurry. Looking back, I understand something I did not understand that night at the Pierre. This was never just about money. Every family betrayal begins the same way, not with a villain, but with a wound someone decided to turn into a weapon. Claudia was not born wanting to destroy. She was born loving her father. The destruction came after. I am not a man who prays often, but I have asked God more than once whether doing the right thing and causing irreparable damage can occupy the same moment. I have not received a clean answer. So, let me say this directly, one person to another. Do not be like me. Do not let distance grow between you and the people you love until it becomes permanent. Do not assume presence is the same as connection. Every family story contains a version of this. A silence that lasted too long, a decision that rippled further than anyone intended. Every family betrayal carries a smaller, earlier failure inside it. A moment when someone chose distance over honesty. It matters. It always matters. This is a family story worth remembering, not for the fraud, not for the arrests, but for what it cost two people to finally sit across a kitchen table and tell the truth. If something here stayed with you, leave a comment. Share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe. We will be here with more stories that matter. Thank you for staying until the end. The stories on this channel contain fictional elements built for educational purposes. If this content is not for you, that is completely valid. Choose what serves you. For those who remain, we are glad you are here.